I have been accused in the past of pacing and ranting. It's true. But I've never paced and ranted in front of a church before. This is my first sermon. So we'll see how that goes. Usually I'm on the other side of these, running sound. This is new for me. So I was asked to do this a few weeks ago, and ever since I accepted it, the devil has opened the floodgates of hell on me. It's been intense, but the joke's on him because now I'm doing it. So, without further preamble, why do people reject God? In my experience, there are 3 reasons. The first reason is the sin of pride. People hear that they are not all that they could be. God even says we're evil, and that we are not capable of becoming good enough to be acceptable to Him of our own strength. And some people find this horribly offensive. This is best described in the Cain and Abel story. In Genesis chapter 3, God tells Adam and Eve that the Messiah would come out of Eve. And then they assumed, I think, the same thing any one of us would have assumed, that their firstborn son was going to be the Messiah. So I think Cain grew up hearing that he was going to be the Messiah who would take away their sins. This is just my speculation, but it flows. And when Cain and Abel became adults, and it was time for their first sacrifice, Abel did what God asked. Cain didn't. Cain offered the work of his hands, vegetables, and God rejected him. And then he went and sulked in the corner. Now, clinically in psychology, we call this narcissism. When children get unearned praise, it creates an identity in their minds that they're better than other people, worthier than other people, more pretty or smarter than other people, and they deserve more than other people. Cain thought he deserved that whatever he did would be acceptable. God said, "Why are you angry? Do right and you'll be accepted." And Cain got up, went to his brother, and murdered him. I think, and this is just me speculating again, that Cain said to God, "If you want a blood sacrifice, take this one." Reason number 1, pride, narcissism. Very uncommon in my experience, but it happens. The second reason, and probably the most common one I've ever seen, I've seen this dozens if not hundreds of times, is people who grow up without a loving father. This is, in my experience, behind every single atheist I've ever debated or met. They grow up, they've never experienced love, so when they hear about the plan of salvation, it makes no sense to them. They can't imagine it, they can't conceive of it. That kind of love is alien to them. And so often, though not always, I've met Christians who overcame this. They reject God. They walk away from Him. It makes no sense to them. It's foolishness to them. I think the solution to this is having children from the people I've seen overcome it. But I've seen this dozens of times, particularly when I was in college. I saw this all the time. The third reason people reject God, and the reason I'd like to concentrate on today, is theological stumbling blocks. People take some aspect of Scripture, generally one of the bloodier passages of the Old Testament, and they misunderstand it and then misconstrue the character of God and reject Him. Now, I've heard a lot of these, but one of them stands out far above the rest. The number 1 most common theological stumbling block I've ever heard is that if God is a God of love, with perfect knowledge and absolute power, then why is the world so full of suffering? Really good question, actually. Life could be described as suffering. Our default state could be described as suffering. Yes, we have joy, we have love, but most of the time it's suffering. If you just look at the wars of the last 100 years, 10 million people were killed in the First World War. As the war ended, some idiot got it into his head that it would be a great idea to give everyone live virus flu vaccines before they went home. In the next few months, 20 million people, twice as many actually died in the war, died of the Spanish flu. few years later, World War II, some of the greatest horrors ever committed, 60 million dead. Just in the last few years, the War on Terror, about 2 million dead. Setting war aside for a moment, in the 20th century alone, about 250 million people were murdered by their own governments. The population of the United States is only a little over 300 million. That's most of the people in this country. The Nationalist Socialists in Germany, the Nazis, took out 11 million. Jews, gypsies, politically undesirables, and such like. The Soviet Union killed between 30 and 50 million, so many that the error in our estimate is in the tens of millions. In the Ukraine alone, the breadbasket of Eastern Europe and Russia, farmers called kulaks, who had committed the crime of being marginally more successful than their neighbors, were starved to the tune of 7 million. In communist China, between the revolution and the later Cultural Revolution, about 100 million people died. In the United States, since 1973, after Roe versus Wade, more than 60 million babies have been murdered in the womb. So when people ask me, why is the world so full of suffering? I don't just dismiss them. It's a good question. I grew up around a lot of troubled friends. As I got older and I heard their childhood stories that they would tell me, I estimate that about a quarter of them have been, shall we delicately put it, violated in childhood. I watched them grow up, and one by one, they'd lose their minds. They'd go crazy. They'd shave their heads. They'd color what was left of their hair purple. They would become morbidly obese or horribly emaciated. They'd get tattoos and piercings. Today in popular culture, we shame these people. We call them snowflakes. But I knew them as children. I saw what happened to them, and I can't help but pity them. So life is full of suffering. And if God loves us so much, and if he has so much power to save us, why does he let this happen, especially to children who can't possibly deserve it? They haven't had the time, the training to make a choice like adults have. There must be something else going on. So people would ask me this question, and I'd have answers, but they weren't very good answers. I didn't even find them convincing myself. I would say God gives us free will. We have the freedom to do good, but also with the freedom to do evil. And the freedom to do evil is just as important as the freedom to do good. If God restricted our freedom, he would be a tyrant, which would make him evil. God can't be evil, therefore we must have freedom. But that begs the question, why not just protect the elect, the people who are called by his name, the ones who follow him? And I've heard arguments against this. Some people say, well, some people would follow him for the protection, for the benefits. But I think God can tell the difference between people who follow him for his character and follow him for earthly blessings. So why? The question remains unanswered. And why not at least protect children until they're old enough to make a decision to follow God or not? I have only recently been giving the answer to this question, and it lies in the book of Job. The book of Job was written, according to Hebrew tradition, about 3,500 years ago by Moses while he was in his exile in Midian, in the home of Jethro, so roughly 1485 to 1445 BC, about the same time Moses wrote the book of Exodus. The events of Job, however, take place before that. We know that because, for one thing, the lifespans are extended. Job says that he was an old man at the time this happened, and yet after his curse was lifted, he lived another 140 years. So this must have been shortly after the flood. There are also strange and extinct creatures mentioned, such as what it calls the unicorn, which is a now extinct species of rhinoceros with a very long horn. At one point, a brontosaurus is described, having a tail like the cedars of Lebanon. But the place names are post-flood, and the ethnic names are post-flood. At one point, Chaldeans are mentioned, and those are a post-flood people. And rain is mentioned. There's no rain before the flood, so this must have happened after the flood. Personally, I think the book of Job took place right around the time of Nimrod or Abraham, shortly after the Tower of Babel. Job chapter 1, There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and turned away from evil. Land of Uz. Uz was one of the sons of Aram. Aram lived in northern Syria, so that gives us a good idea where Job lived. You've heard of Aramaic. Aramaic is the language of Aram. And there was born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the children of the East. He was the Warren Buffett, Bill Gates of his time. He was Elon Musk of his time. Everyone knew who he was. And his sons went and held a feast in the house of each one upon his day, and they sent and called for 3 of their sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feastings were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt sacrifices according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and renounced God in their hearts." Thus did Job continuously. This is the American Standard Version, my favorite translation. The King James Version doesn't say renounced, it says cursed, which I used in the title because I like it better. Job is offering sacrifices for potential sins his children may have done. So this is all part of the first chapter of Job describing just how good he was, how righteous he was. I mean, until I read this thoroughly, I didn't even realize you could offer intercessory sacrifice. But apparently you can, or you could, back when they did sacrifice. Now it came to pass on the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Jehovah, that Satan came also among them. The sons of God are described throughout Scripture. In the Old Testament, they're angels. This is a heavenly council meeting. The leaders of all the various different created worlds are all coming together to have a meeting with God. And Satan comes in because he's the legitimate ruler of the earth, having taken that title from Adam when he fell. And Jehovah said unto Satan, "Whence comest thou? Where have you been?" Then Satan answered Jehovah and said, "From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it." And Jehovah said unto Satan, "Hast thou considered my servant Job?" See, he knows Satan's coming, and he's laid a trap for him. "For there is none like him in the earth, and a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and turneth away from evil." So, there's a lesson to be learned here. When we do what God asks us, when we're righteous, God will brag about us to the most powerful beings in existence. Then Satan answered Jehovah and said, "Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will renounce thee to thy face." And Jehovah said unto Satan, "Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thy hand." So Satan went forth from the presence of Jehovah. God knows what's coming next. That's why he laid the trap. He knows Job isn't going to break. But I think even Satan knew this was a trap, and he couldn't help himself. When given an opportunity to accuse us before God, he just does it, even if he knows it's going to blow up in his face. More speculation. And it fell on a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, that there came a messenger unto Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee." While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, "The fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I only alone am escaped to tell thee." Lucifer has the power to use the fire from heaven when God lets him. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, "The Chaldeans made 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have taken them away. Yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee." While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the four corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose and rent his robe and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped and he said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. Jehovah gave, and Jehovah hath taken away. Blessed be the name of Jehovah. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So what's the game of the devil? To drive us so crazy from fear and pain and grief and loss and torment that we can't take it anymore, we break and we curse him to his face. But Job didn't do this. Again, it came to pass on the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Jehovah, that Satan came also among them to present himself before Jehovah. And Jehovah said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered Jehovah and said, From going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. Sounds familiar? And Jehovah said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? For there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and turneth away from evil, and he still holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered Jehovah and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thy hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will renounce thee to thy face. And Jehovah said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thy hand, only spare his life. So Satan went forth from the presence of Jehovah, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown, bleeding sores on the bottom of your foot, all the way to the top of your head. Been there. That's no fun. And he took him a potsherd, a piece of pottery, to scrape himself therewith, the sores, because they itch. And he sat amongst the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still hold fast thine integrity? Renounce God and die. But he said unto her, Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What, shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. There's another lesson there. When the test comes to every believer to test your character, he will turn the people closest to you against you. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shushite, and Zophar the Naamathite. It takes a lot of practice to get those names right when you're saying them quickly. And they made an appointment together to come to bemoan him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his robe and sprinkled dust upon their heads towards heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. These friends don't seem so bad. Not yet, anyway. So chapters 3 through 37 go about like this. It's a lot of material. The book of Job is almost as long as Genesis, and we don't have a week to go through it, so I'm going to summarize. Job begins at the end of the 7 days, cursing the day he was born and wishing to die to his friends. Even Job, righteous, perfect Job, was suicidal when he lost everything. Job's friends accuse Job of wrongdoing and mock him when he defends himself. Job's friends say, God only destroys people when they've done something to deserve it. And Job says, yeah, that's true, but what did I do? If I've done something wrong, show me what I do. And they go back and forth like this for 30-odd chapters. Job's friends say that God destroys the wicked and prospers the righteous. Job was righteous. They talk about all the things that Job used to do, that he would give to the poor, feed the hungry, clothe the homeless, or clothe the naked, and house the homeless. And at one point they even say, "But now it's your turn." They're mocking him. They're rubbing his nose in it. Both Job and his friends make one fatal assumption, that his destruction comes as a result of something he's done that makes him either deserve it or not deserve it. And this is the whole premise of their argument, which lasts most of the book. This is not an uncommon idea. The book of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, and talking about Jesus, and as he passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither did this man sin nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. So God will do bad things to you, or let things happen to you, to glorify himself, not necessarily because you deserve it. But what about the wicked? Are the wicked not judged? We know they're judged, but I think they're judged in a way that we don't quite understand." Genesis 15, 12 to 16. This is Abraham before he gets his new name, so he's Abram. "And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram," or Abram, "Know of a surety that thy seed shall be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall be afflicted them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with a great substance. But thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, thou shalt be buried in a good old age. And in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full." The Amorite. The Amorites were a tribe of Canaanite giants who had 2 kingdoms east of the Jordan River. They were the worst of them. You've heard of the city of Gomorrah? Gomorrah is a mistranslation. If you look at the Hebrew, it is the city of Amorah, named after the patriarch of the tribe of the Amorites. Hammurabi, who is credited with having the first codified law, was an Amorite who invaded Mesopotamia roughly during the time of Abraham. Even back then, we have writings from this period, which are other pagan races, talking about how evil the Amorites are. But God didn't give trials and tribulations to the Amorites. He sat there and kept score and waited until they'd done enough evil for him to send Israel in to wipe them out to the last, every single last man. That's how God deals with the wicked. There's a case that's been in the news lately, which really caught my attention because I know something about it. A man named Jeffrey Epstein. When I was in college, I took forensic psychology. I studied serial killers and rapists and arsonists and all manner of evil people. I was going to go into law enforcement with it before God decided that wasn't what I was going to do. But one of the people I studied back then, all the way back in 2012, 2013, was this man named Jeffrey Epstein, who was the kingpin of the entire operation to generate blackmail on the world's elites, the richest, most powerful people in the world, to make sure they stayed in line or they didn't go public with certain things that they knew. The man would use children to generate this blackmail. Now, recently he died. He made it to 66 years old. He was a multimillionaire. Some people think he even had billions, but it's kind of hard to tell because his banking wasn't exactly public knowledge. He had unmitigated success. God never gave him a single trial or tribulation in his life, and yet he was utterly evil. And then when he'd finally done enough evil, God threw him in a jail cell and killed him. Now, we're told he committed suicide. But the coroner's report says that he had multiple cervical vertebrae fractures and a hyoid fracture. A hyoid is like a wishbone. It's right in here, wraps around your throat. Now, I paid attention in forensic anthropology. That means the man was manually strangled. That's how God deals with the wicked. That's how God judges the wicked. So if you think you're being judged by God for doing something evil, if you're still breathing, probably not. You're probably being tested like Job. Then going to chapter 38. This is the end of the book of Job. Job and his friends have been debating back and forth. There's actually 4 of Job's friends. One of them is a junior member, so he doesn't get counted amongst the other thing. But they're all sitting there accusing Job, talking about the power of God, the glory of God, the character of God, and how evil Job is for justifying himself before God, which they're not entirely wrong, but we'll get to that. Then in chapter 38, God has been listening to all of this, and I don't know about you, but when I hear people talk about something I'm well qualified in and they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, it bothers me a little. Bothers God too. He's angry. So chapter 38, then Jehovah answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. You don't know what you're talking about. You're ignorant, but now it's time to put on your man pants. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who determined the measure thereof, if thou knowest? Or who stretchest the line upon it? Whereupon were the foundations fastened, or who laid the cornerstone thereof, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the seas with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made clouds the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and marked out for it my bound, and set bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud ways be stayed? Hast thou commanded the morning since the days began, and caused the dayspring to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked shall be shaken out of it? It is changed as clay under the seal, and all things stand forth as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm is broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Or hast thou walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed unto you? Or hast thou seen the gates of the shadow of death? Hast thou comprehended the earth in its breadth? Declare if thou knowest it all. Where is the way of the dwelling of light? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? Thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldest discern the paths to the house thereof. Doubtless thou knowest, for thou wast then born, and the number of thy days is great. That's sarcasm. God is being sarcastic with Job. You know you're in trouble when God is being sarcastic with you. This goes on for a couple of chapters. I'm going to skip over some of it. God talks about his creation. He talks about the various mighty animals that he's created. And could Job create these animals? Of course not. Moreover, Jehovah answered Job and said, shall he that cavilleth contend with the Almighty? He that argueth with God, let him answer it. Then Job answered Jehovah and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer thee? I lay my hand upon my mouth. Once have I spoken, and I will not answer, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. So Job is silent. Job realizes he doesn't know what he's talking about, but God's not done yet. Then Jehovah answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, gird up now thy loins like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Put your man pants back on. Wilt thou even annul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me that thou mayest be justified? Or hast thou an arm like God? And canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Deck thyself now with excellency and dignity, and array thyself with honor and majesty. Pour forth the overflowings of thine anger, and look upon every one that is proud, and abase him. So God's saying, can you do all of these things that are my job? Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in the hidden place. Then will I also confess of thee that thine own right hand can save thee. Why is God accusing Job of trying to save himself? He's just sitting on the ground complaining. He's complaining that he didn't deserve this. He thinks that by saying he didn't deserve this, he can lift his own curse. He's justifying himself before God. Now God talks about a particular animal, and this is a very strange passage, so I'm going to read the whole thing. Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Leviathan, we're generally told, is a whale. I don't think so, but we'll see. Canst thou put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw through with a hook? Will he make many supplications unto thee, or will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee that thou shouldest take him for a servant forever? So this Leviathan creature, can you domesticate him? No. Wilt thou play with him as with a bird, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Can you turn him into a pet? No. Will the bands of fishermen make traffic of him? Will they part him among the merchants? Can you eat him? No. Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thy hand upon him. Remember the battle, and do so no more. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Will not one be cast down even at the sight of him? This Leviathan creature, you can't fish him either. He's too big. He's too powerful. You'll be so afraid when you see him that you won't be able to do anything. None is so fierce that he dare stir him up. Who then is he that can stand before me? This creature is so great that there isn't a single living man who would face it. And yet Job stands before God and justifies himself. It's a little risky. Who hath first given unto me that I should repay him? Whatsoever under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs, nor his mighty strength, nor his goodly frame. Leviathan is a big, strong, robust creature. Who can strip off his outer garments? Who shall come within his jaws? You can't skin this creature. You can't hold its mouth open. Who can open the doors of his face? Round about his teeth is terror. So he's got terrifying teeth. His strong scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another that they stick together so that they cannot be sundered. He's got scales. Doesn't sound like a whale. Scary teeth and scales. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. He's got glowing eyes. This is getting weird. Out of his mouth go burning torches, and sparks of fire leap forth. He can breathe fire. Out of his nostrils a smoke goeth as of a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth forth from his mouth. Breathing fire. In his neck abideth strength, and his terror danceth before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm upon him. They cannot be moved. His heart is as firm as a stone, yea, firm as a nether millstone. When he raiseth himself up, the mighty are afraid. By reason of consternation, they are beside themselves. Big, scary creature. If one lay at him with a sword, it cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, nor the pointed shaft. He counteth iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned with him into stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the rushing of the javelin. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreadeth, as it were, a threshing wain upon the mire. He's impervious to human weapons. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. He maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be hoary. Upon earth there is not his like that is made without fear. He beholdeth everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. God has created this creature, which I suspect is extinct now because we don't see fire-breathing water dragons in the local zoo. He created this creature so that all of humanity would have something more powerful than they were. If we are less powerful than the creatures of God, what insanity would it be for us to go before God and to justify ourselves before him, who is infinitely more powerful than any creature he might make? Job chapter 42, last chapter. I'm almost done, I promise. Then Job answered Jehovah and said, I know that thou canst do all things, and that no purpose of thine can be restrained. Who is this that hideth counsel without knowledge? I am ignorant. Therefore have I uttered that which I understood not, things too wonderful for me which I knew not. Hear, I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and thou declare unto me. I heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. Job didn't understand. God knew Job didn't understand. This is the point of the test. A Job test is designed to do two things. One, to reveal your character, to show you any flaws, any defects you might have that come between you and God, and then give you an opportunity to build more character. Job was perfect and upright, but this test revealed a flaw. Job justified himself for all the good that he did. Now, God knew that this flaw was a result of ignorance, and he winks at our ignorance. So he personally showed Job what he didn't know and gave Job a choice. Now Job has a choice. On one hand, he can do as his wife said, curse God and die. Or he can admit that he's not all that he thought he was, that he did wrong, and that God is perfect and right, which is what he does. And it was so that after Jehovah had spoken these words unto Job, Jehovah said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against thee and against thy two friends, for ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath. Job just told the truth. All of his self-justification before that is wiped clean by his repentance. Now therefore take unto you 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for him will I accept, that I deal not with you after your folly. For ye have spoken not of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath. So Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shushite, and Zophar the Naamathite went and did according as Jehovah commanded them, and Jehovah accepted Job. He didn't accept them, he accepted Job. And Jehovah turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. So the mechanism that ended Job's test was forgiving his friends and praying for them. The people who accuse us when we go through our own test and cause us to stumble, when we pray for them, we reveal that our own character is better, and we will end our own test. We will show our allegiance to God to be sure and solid, that we're not going to be wishy-washy, go back and forth. Then came there unto him all his brethren, and all his sisters, and all they that had been of acquaintance before. So everybody who knew him left him when he got sick and lost everything and lost his family. But they're all coming back now. And did eat bread with him in his house, and they bemoaned him and comforted him concerning all the evil that Jehovah had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one a ring of gold. So God restored Job's riches. So Jehovah blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. That's twice as much as he had before. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters, so we got more children. Not the ones he had before, but he got more. And they called the name of the first Jemina, and the name of the second Kezia, and the name of the third Keren Habuk. Just out of curiosity, I looked these up in Strong's. The first one means warm and affectionate, which makes sense. The second one means bark of the acacia tree, which doesn't make sense. And the third one means flask of cosmetics. Strange. And in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. And after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So Job died, being old and full of days. So this is a while ago. This is far antiquity. This is when lifespans were still extended. These trials and tribulations that we have, I think it's the book of Isaiah, says Israel receives twice for all her sins. God gives these to us for our benefit. They reveal flaws in our character. They show us where we're weak, where we need to grow. And The wicked don't receive them. The wicked just skate through life like a lizard on ice. And then when they've done enough evil, God wipes them out utterly. He kills them. If you're still alive, you're not one of them. If you're still alive and receiving trials and tribulations, you're not one of them. God knows that there's no point in giving trials and tribulations to the wicked. He did it to Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Tutmosis III. He brought all of these plagues on the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and it brought about absolutely no change of character whatsoever. The Pharaoh would repent, and then the next day he'd change his mind, each and every time. And when Israel finally got out of Egypt, he followed after them, and God dealt with him, as he does, the wicked. He drowned him in the Gulf of Aqaba. Interesting that the tomb of Tutmosis III does not have Tutmosis III in it. They didn't recover the body. As I said, if we're still alive and we're receiving trials and tribulations, this isn't a judgment on our evil. This is an opportunity to build character. God is showing us our weaknesses. The game of Lucifer is how much fear and pain and loss and anger and torment and grief can you take before you break and you curse God to his face? When you lose loved ones, when you lose your job, when you lose your health, when you lose your property, when your friends and family band around you to accuse you, to tell you that it's all your fault, this is all the game of Lucifer, to get you to turn against God. Now, I mentioned before that I studied forensic psychology. What happens when you curse God and die? Most people, they just commit suicide, but that's only out of cowardice. There's a small minority of people. See, you curse God. What is God? God is an individual, but he's also his character, his law. There's the 10 Commandments. When you curse God, you flip the 10 Commandments upside down. What is good is now evil, and what was evil before now becomes good to you. So when it says, thou shalt not murder, becomes thou shalt murder. You read manifestos of serial killers and mass murderers and such, school shooters, like Carl Panzram or the Columbine shooters. They're very specific about what they do, their motives. They say, all of this stuff happened to me, all of this tragedy, and God should have protected me. He didn't, therefore God is evil, and I'm going to mock God. This is a theme that's repeated all throughout these manifestos. Every villain starts out as a victim. There was a film I watched when I was in college studying forensic psychology. It was called Prisoners. These two fathers have their daughters kidnapped. They live. All the good people live. It all ends up happily in the end. But it's a story about character. These two fathers have their daughters kidnapped, and they don't know what happened, and they can't figure it out, and the police are being slow and obstinate. And one of the fathers, who is the main character of the movie, goes out and looks for his daughter. And eventually he figures out who kidnapped his daughter. But the police won't do anything because they legally can't. And so, towards the end of the film, he goes to rescue his daughter himself. And the murderer figures out that he knows and holds him at gunpoint. And then shoots him in the leg to control him so that he can't run away. And then begins to put him into a pit in the ground where this person will now hold him prisoner. And as this is all happening, the main character speaks about why she does what she does. And she tells a story where many decades before, she and her husband had a child, and that child died. And they were so consumed with grief that it drove them mad. And they decided that their child died because God was evil and tormenting them. God was torturing them. And so their purpose in life, and I quote, is, "This is the war we wage with God." People who curse God and die, as Job's wife tempted him to do, taunt God, torture God by hurting his children. But if you are like Job, if you maintain your integrity, you're immune to that. You won't do that yourself. Other people may do it to you or around you, but you have no fear of becoming that yourself. All of these school shooters, church shooters, people who blow up shopping malls, it's an epidemic these days. And if you actually study their manifestos, what they're doing is torturing God. Now, aside from that, almost all of them are on SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressant drugs that after about 6 months of taking them, you don't care about anything. They about double your risk factor for committing violence. You won't hear that on the 6 o'clock news. It might hurt sales. In my opinion, every one of the elect must go through this test at one point or another in their lives. Because until you go through this test, you cannot be certain that you are fit to be a citizen of heaven. The angels must see you go through this test before they're confident to have you around them after the resurrection. So don't be surprised when this happens to you. I've seen people, this was their entire lives. I've seen people who, this was just a few years of their lives. I listen to people who I respect in the church, and they talk about their conversion experience. I mean, take Walter Veith, for instance. His baby was demon-possessed, and there were toys orbiting in circles around its head. That's a Job test. And from what I have seen, most of the strongest leaders in the church all go through this test. And they're not particularly effective in the church until they come to the end of it, at which point they have made their allegiance concrete, certain. Job's friends fulfilled the same role as Lucifer. They were the accuser of the brethren. They accused him. What did they not do? Remember, this is the Middle East. The Middle East is the culture of hospitality. They should have given him food. They should have given him clothing. They should have given him water. They should have given him a place to sleep. They should have given him ointment for his sores, but they didn't. They sat under a tree while he scraped himself with a piece of pottery, and they accused him. They told him that what was happening to him was good because he probably deserved it. When we see other people around us go through this test, it's our job to help them, to feed them, to clothe them, to give them medical treatment, to give them a place to stay. I think, although it's not actually said in the book, I suspect this is one of the reasons God was so furiously angry at Job's friends and commanded Job to pray for them. That is all.